They might be new.
Rec-
So we are going to read from 1 Kings 17, and I'm just going to read verses 2 through 16. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Some time later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. And the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So he went to Zarephath, and when he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may drink? As she was going to get it, he called, And bring me, please, a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. Elijah said to her, Do not be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up. The jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. This is the word of the Lord for us this morning. Thanks be to God. Do you remember the first time you ever put on skates? I'm thinking of roller skates, but it could be ice skates too. And if it's so long ago that you don't remember it, you think about some child that you have seen wearing roller skates for the first time. Can you picture that feeling of unease? Sort of the terror, the out of control nature that comes along with having wheels on your feet. Probably not since you were learning to walk did you feel so physically out of control, right? And what's more, to get the hang of skating, you have to sort of rethink your entire perception of what it means to move. Our natural inclination is to keep walking, like we haven't learned to walk. But if you're picking up these very heavy skates and putting them down, you'll find pretty quickly that that doesn't work very well. Walking also usually means keeping your feet off the ground as much as possible, right? We don't want to drag our feet along the ground. But when you're skating, the opposite is true. You want the wheels or the blades or whatever it is to remain on the ground as much as possible. That's the key to success, but it is completely counterintuitive. And this is the parallel I want to draw with fasting. We have to begin to think about the world slightly differently than we have, than we want to. Fasting puts us in this different mindset, or at least it should. That's going to be my argument this morning. Like any spiritual discipline, the value of fasting is not just doing it, but it's doing it for the right reason, for understanding why you fast. We have to understand the purpose before we can really engage properly. It doesn't do any good to just skip lunch if that's all you're doing, right? And you might think, well, fasting doesn't seem all that complicated. I do it for Lent every year, and that's fine. And we do. We fast at Lent. We give up chocolate or TV or dating or whatever it might be for you. And we try to use that suffering that we experience to relate to the suffering of Christ. That's a part of what Lent is. But as I thought about that and my own experience, I realized that for some of us, this becomes just an exercise in self-denial or self-discipline. A lot of people give up something bad for them and they try to use Lent as this springboard to just stop doing it. You know, it's a way to quit smoking or drinking or to eat healthier, lose some weight. And there's really nothing wrong with that. I mean, self-discipline is a good thing. And I do think it serves the purposes of Lent. You have a chance to experience a little bit of suffering and it helps you to reflect on what Christ has done. But I'm not sure that it's fasting, at least in the way that Scripture talks about fasting. Now, originally, the concept of fasting was simply just going without food for a certain period of time. And that's not really self-discipline, unless maybe you have some sort of difficulty with eating, an eating disorder of some kind. Then it might be self-discipline. But it's, in a sense, a form of self-harm, right? You're doing something bad for you by not eating. We could fast oxygen or water, I suppose, but it would probably not last long enough for us to learn anything from it, right? Food is the good one because you could go quite a while without eating. You're denying yourself something essential to living. But should you? Right? It's not smart or particularly healthy to go without eating for a long period of time. And that is kind of the reason why I chose the passage that I did. I don't want to mine this for some deep theological insight. I don't want to, we're not going to talk about the Hebrew translation of this scripture. I love these two stories because they are examples of what God calls us to. We have two people who have been essentially asked to give up food. Now, in these stories, God promises to feed them, and they believe those promises, and the food comes, and no one actually goes hungry in these stories. But it's the call to give up food that so relates to fasting. Elijah is called to go into the wilderness, away from home, away from his security, his food sources, and he's called to give up control, to depend on God for his very life. Now, God tells him the ravens are going to bring you food, but if God told you that birds were going to drop off food every day, maybe you're not. I mean, he goes, right? He's got some faith that God is going to come through, but he's leaving a situation where he is in control, and he's moving to one where he is not. And similarly, the widow is in the same situation. This is a widow with a small child, and we know her son is very small, because if he had been anywhere close to 13 years old, he would be the one out gathering sticks, and she would be back home. So we have this woman with a small child in the midst of a famine with no one else to turn to, and she is called to give away literally the last of her food. The only thing she can control in life is what her last meal is going to be. And God says, give it away. And she does. That's my contention today, that the call to fasting is a call to give up control. And that's a scary thing, because we like control. Right? Now, perhaps in your fasting experience in the past, during Lent or whenever, control really is the issue that you deal with. Maybe your fasting feels a little bit scary, more than just self-discipline. Maybe it feels like your first time on skates when you don't know what to do, and your dependence on God grows, and that's a wonderful thing. But I know for a lot of us, and I'm reflecting on my experience, and I know it's certainly shared by some, that the kinds of fasts we do for Lent, TV or chocolate or whatever it happens to be, end up being more about gaining control over something else in our lives than it is about giving up control. I like the opportunity to fast because it gives me a chance to get rid of something that maybe has taken too big a role in my life. Something that's made me unhealthy, something that has limited me in some way. Like I said, it's self-discipline. And so it's very easy for our fasting to become a way for us to gain control in life rather than a way for us to give it up. And that's not bad. I don't want to say that. Self-discipline is a good thing. These are important practices. We should not, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it that way, but that fasting is something different. Because ultimately, are we in control of our lives? No, we're not. We like to think we are. There may be some aspects of our life that we can control for short periods of time, and we really enjoy that. We like to have that security. But ultimately, at any moment, something completely unexpected could happen, and we have no control over that. Even the end, right? Very few people are lucky enough to see death coming along. For most people, it comes out of nowhere, and you certainly can't control it. And some of us, myself, are a little more control freaks than others. We like to have our hands in everything, or at least to have the illusion of control, right? But fasting should not be one of those things. Fasting should not be about self-control. It's about giving up control to God. A reminder that God is in control. That's the whole point. If you give up a meal and you are hungry and you're experiencing hunger, it's a reminder that God is in control. When Elijah and the widow agreed to give up food, they're recognizing whether I live or die, it's in God's hands and not my own. And that's true for all of us. Even if we order our lives in such a way that we deny or reject or pretend that that's not true. We want to maintain this illusion of control. Control becomes an idol in our lives, and fasting is one of the ways that we can combat that. We don't like to feel vulnerable and helpless. That's a terrible feeling. But in reality, as human beings, we are vulnerable and helpless in many situations. And it's not healthy to deny that. It's much better for us to learn how to accept our own vulnerabilities, our own weaknesses, our own lack of control, and deal with them. This is the analogy of skating coming back into play, right? If you pretend that you are in control of those wheels on your feet, you're going to end up clinging to the wall or falling over, and you will not actually ever be skating. You don't know how to live in that world. You have to change the way and accept the lack of control that those wheels on your feet give you. When you see people running around and doing tricks and moving all around, they're responding to the lack of control. They're dealing with the world in which they are not in control, learning a new way to move. And so as we fast, we learn to accept that we're not in control. And instead of feeling helpless, we can learn to operate within that, trusting God for the things we need and making our decisions in a different way, flying around the rink beautifully rather than clinging to the side of the wall. Fasting really should help us embrace that lack of control and live in a world where we can trust God's provision more. It teaches us how to live in this world where we're not in control. And so what I want us to do, obviously if you have comments or things as we move to our discussion time, I want to talk about that. But I also would love for us to brainstorm a little bit and to think about in your own life, what are maybe some of the ways that we can fast? And it might not be giving up the traditional things, but finding a way to be a little less in control of some things in your life. One of the things I thought about to start the sharing this week, I am a huge control freak in a lot of ways, but one of them is loading the dishwasher. I am the person in our house who knows exactly how everything is going to fit in the right way, and people often get frustrated with me that I will go back and move things around that they've already put in there. People can relate to this sort of thing, right? And so one small step of fasting may just be refusing to move things around and letting people put things in the dishwasher and leave it as it is, right? Because as much as I would love to control that, it helps me give up control in a way. Do you understand that example? I was talking to another friend this week, and he's a manager, and he works from home, and so his work is always there in front of him, and he tends to work 7 days a week, largely because the work keeps coming, and using 7 days instead of 5 is a great way to keep up with the work. And he said, well, maybe I just need to stop working on Sunday. He said, I don't know how I'll get all my work done if I don't, but that is some step towards the direction of control. So I'm curious, as I've been talking and you've been listening and hopefully thinking, what are some of the ways in which you see control at play in your life, and perhaps that you can, in small ways, give up a little bit of control?
I feel like I want to comment on my mom for a second because she's definitely she's definitely a control freak, and
Yeah.
she worries about me and my brother a lot. So and plus we're growing up, so we tend to do our own little things. Like
Yeah.
I tend to do my own things. Like she be trying to help me most of the times, like trying to get me like application stuff. I'm like, Mom, I already have that done. I'm like, oh, but I understand that she's trying to help, but sometimes she just needs to let me and my brother like grow up a little bit,
Yeah.
and sometimes she just needs to like let us do our own thing. So I've seen that a lot with my mom, but
Yeah.
you know, just let God do the work.
Well, and it's good to have that perspective too, because we often don't see the effects that our control has on other people, right? That makes us feel good to be in control of something, but in some sense, that can be robbing somebody else of the ability to do something and be on their own and learn and grow. Yeah.
First, I want to go back to the first time I was roller skating
Sure. I want to hear this.
because when I first put on a pair of roller skates, we had a key. You put the skate on, and then you had to take a key to tighten it around your foot. And the first time I did that, my foot came out when I was skating because I didn't have it on right and fell. But then I learned you had to pinch the sides of your shoes in order to get that, to keep your shoes on. So it was a little more difficult skating in those days, but
Sure.
I did relate to your part about being out of control.
Sure.
The other thing I wanted to share was I was glad you mentioned that, Jaden, about your mother, because I was thinking about when I was a mother and had control over my kids, I thought. And
I thought that's
Yeah.
a good
because now that I look back, I didn't have control over them, and they did lots of things that I never knew that they did or didn't do.
Yeah.
And with my grandkids, I've learned a little bit of letting go because I don't feel like I have that responsibility, all of it. But I realized that kids resent it when you constantly tell them how to do something. For instance, loading the dishwasher. I can remember saying that to my kids. Don't put those there because they need to go on the bottom shelf, not the top shelf. And then I realized all I was doing was discouraging them from doing anything. I was constantly criticizing.
Yeah.
And so you learn a little bit with your kids, your grandkids, because your grandkids stand up to you. Where your kids were afraid of you in some ways, but your grandkids will say, "Grandmom, I know how to do that." So I think it takes generations to really learn how to
Sure.
give up control. I don't think it's an automatic thing that we can do, but there's lots of things in my life that I've had to give up control over. Recently with my health problems, you have no control over those things, so you learn to let people help you and take care of you, which is not easy for me to do, but I'm grateful that there's people who care about me that want to help. So I'm learning.
Good.
Yes, I think I want to thank you for that imagery of roller skates. I'm not sure yet because I was the one that held on to that railing for dear life. And I think it was because I was afraid to let the skates control me.
Right.
And it was like, if I fall, people are going to laugh at me, and then I would totally lose control, although at the time I didn't realize that. But I never did acquire the skills to roller skate or to ice skate or to rollerblade. I always left that to somebody else. But in terms of fasting, I always think of it as putting yourself in an element that you're not comfortable with, like even helping in the community.
Sure.
Join a group that you've never joined before. Do acts of kindness for people that you never thought you'd be in association with, because that's what I think God would want us to do. Not so much giving up the chocolate. I think I like chocolate too much. But, and even control now. I mean, I'm a widow and I live alone, and I just get to do anything all the time, whenever I want, get to eat anything, buy anything, within limits. But sometimes you just want somebody else to come in and give you that break and say, "Oh, finally, just do anything. I don't know, so I don't have to do it." Like sometimes it's too much control,
Yeah.
and you realize this isn't good either. So yeah, you brought about a lot of aspects that I started thinking a lot about. But yeah, fasting is. I think my kids too are fasting from seeing me. I think they don't come to visit. Maybe that's what they're doing is fasting. But anyway, thank you for the thought. A very good message.
Well, and what you said is true. Like, when we expand our world, that just exposes us to more things we're not in control of, right? Like, and that's such a difficult thing to do. And again, self-discipline is not bad, but I think fasting is challenging us in a different way, to really find a place where we're not in control. And that's going to be different for everyone, which is why I didn't try to come to some conclusion about how you should do it. But each of us is going to have to figure out what does it mean to take a step out there and risk a little bit and remind yourself that God is in control. Yeah.
I will join in the conversation and say earlier you asked us to reflect on areas where we are bad at giving up control within our own lives. My personal close friendships are definitely an area I struggle with that because I struggle a lot with vulnerability. My friends and I have described it before as I love other people a lot, but I struggle to let them love me. I am constantly taking care of my closest friends as the best I can, but they didn't know when my health issues first started up a few years ago until we were like months in, and I'd been like to the ER twice. And so I spent last spring trying to let them in that regard finally. And the area that I've now noticed I definitely struggle with giving up control there as well is we've defaulted throughout the years to me being the one that plans all of the times we see each other. Like, I am the one who's making sure everyone is going to have all their needs met. This is going to work for everyone. This is going to be what we do throughout this. And I am trying to learn to step back and let them figure that stuff out sometimes. And so sometimes I can just go and meet up with them and not have been the one to figure out, okay, we're doing it at this time, at this place. Does everyone have water? Do you all have your work schedules figured out so we can do it? And just getting to sometimes be the one to show up is nice but very difficult, and something I'm trying to work on giving up some control with.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other side. We all touched on it, and it's definitely true for me. And we certainly don't have, hours of group therapy to do this morning. But like, an aspect of control is the notion that if something goes wrong, people are going to blame me and think less of me, right? Because of that. And that's something we all have to deal with as well, as like, if I don't load the dishwasher, some things might not get clean, and we'll just have to live with that, right? And that doesn't reflect poorly on me as a person or any of that. And it's true with kids, right? That's a lot of the parental notion. You want to control your kids because if they make some bad choices, that reflects on you, and then you feel badly about that. And I think that happens in life. You can see it with other relationships as well. So it's a lot to think about, but I just want us to leave with a challenge of God is in control. And the more ways we can remember that physically with our actions, the better we are. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I just want to reflect back on what you said, because I'm kind of that type of person as well, where I am the person where I do not like to ask for help whatsoever of what I'm doing. If it's matter by schoolwork, work in general, or just like my own mental problems, because a few months ago I was going through like a mental breakdown of everything, and where I do not like to ask people for help, and like I would rather fail than ask for help, because I feel like it's just some sort of a pride thing that I have, where if I ask for help I seem weaker than everybody else, or I feel like in fear to everybody else. So I just been trying to work on that, so where it's okay to ask for help when you need it, but yeah, that's just something I want to comment on. That really hit close to home when what you said, but this is something I want to comment on.
Anyone else? Sounds like we're finished there. So we're going to sing again, hymn number 729, Lord, I Want to Be a Christian.